Hey everybody, I just wanted to go through a little bit on the age pyramids. I just finished going through the discussion board on them, and you picked out some great countries, and there were a lot of great responses about the different questions that I asked you to answer. I just wanted to clarify a few things, plus I know that you probably didn't read through everybody's responses, so I wanted to show you some examples of the different stages with some of the different countries, and also to point out some of the oddities that came up with a few of the countries. So this is the diagram out of your lab manual for the demographic transition. So that is that idea, again, of you've got high birth rates and death rates at the beginning, but then as you start to get technology, medication, things like that, the death rate starts to drop. And the reason why the death rate drops first is because you have all of those things that start to save people's lives. But the birth rate stays steady because generally culture doesn't change. So people are used to having that many children. They're not used to their children, not dying and things like that. And so the birth rate stays at that higher level generally for a while. But then as the technology progresses on, they move farther into the transition and the death rate starts to drop. You might be thinking, well, if the birth rate has dropped and the death rate is dropping, why is the population here increasing? And this is a phenomenon that isn't described in your textbook, but it's called population momentum. Basically, the idea is you already had the numbers building up back here. And so you've already got a population that even though they're not having as many kids, you've got a large enough number that you're starting into that, linear growth of a population. Because you've started exponential growth and now at this point you're into linear growth. Then eventually the birth rates and death rates come back to pretty close to being even because now you're in that post-industrial, everything has kind of evened out. You've got good health care, you have, jobs and food availability is good. And so the population starts to slow down in its growth, steady out, and then even eventually it can decrease. And this is because the birth rate starts to drop. If you go below replacement level, if you go below that 2.1 fertility level, then you're going to start to have a decrease in the population. And so the pyramids that I had you look at, and pretty much everybody identified their pyramids pretty much right on. Those pyramid shapes tell you which section of this is going on because the shapes will let you know, like here in late stage 4 or stage 5, depending on whose book you're looking at. Because the pyramid is smaller down here at the bottom than it is farther up, you don't have as many kids compared to the reproductive section of your population. So the people who are having kids aren't having as many. And so you're at this point where your fertility rate is lower, and that indicates that that population is going to shrink in the future. All right, so after me reviewing all of that, I just want to, like I said, I want to point out some of the pyramids that some of you found. You found some great countries. So this is the United Republic of Tanzania, and this has that very classic pyramid shape. You can see why we call them population pyramids, because those early stages in the demographic transition very much look like pyramids. But what I want to point out, because there was some discussion on your board on whether this is stage 1 or stage 2. This is stage 2. So let's go back and look at what's the difference between stage 1 and stage 2. Because some of you pointed out in the lab manual, it states there are no stage 1 countries anymore. And that is true. We have no stage 1 countries in the world. And if you look, the difference here is they both have the pyramid shape, but stage 1 has incredibly high birth rates because they also have those high death rates. And so the very bottom of the pyramid in a stage 1 country is incredibly wide. Okay, a majority, well, not a majority, but a good section of the population is in that 0 to 4 because there's a high mortality rate down there. And so you can see that the bar for 0 to 4 is not quite double 5 to 9, but it's close. And so that is the big difference between a stage 1 and a stage 2. Stage 2s can vary in their pyramid shape. So we've got the United Republic of Tanzania, and then we've got Rwanda, right? They have very slightly different shapes because Rwanda is not nearly as pointy up here at the top, but same idea, right? If you look at the numbers down here, the numbers for the kids are close to each other. There's not like the 0-4 section that's really, really big compared to the 5 to 9 section, right? And then you can get countries like Egypt, where this is still going, this is kind of in between 1 and 2. So, or sorry, 2 and 3. So if you said that, that would be an acceptable answer. If you said 2 or 3, I would accept that as long as you explained why you chose those. So it has the pyramid shape for a 2, but it's starting to get those more smooth areas on the side, which is more like a 3. And so, you know, Egypt is in that transition. It still has pretty high growth because a lot of the population's down here in the younger part of the population. You can see that part of the pyramid is much wider than the reproducing section of the population. They are probably closer to a 2 than they are a 3, just because if they were closer to a 3, this bottom section would be closer in size to the bars that are farther up. Israel would be one that I'd say is closer to a 3 than Egypt, because you can see what I'm talking about. Now these are getting closer in. So this one, again, you could say is a 2 or a 3, depending on how you explain it, because it does still have that pyramid-y shape. So if we go back and look at, so you've got that still pyramid type shape in 3, but you're starting to get some of those upright type sides. So Israel still has a little bit of a pyramid to it, but it's starting to get some of those upright sides. So this is pretty close to a 3. But if you said a 2 and explained that it's got that wider base, then, you know, I would, you know, say, okay. Then you've got a country like Djibouti. This is a very unusual pyramid. Now, this country, it would be expected to grow, but not grow very, very fast, generally, because of the shape. So if you look, you've got fairly flat sides. We've got some oddity going on over here, and I'll talk about that here in a second. It's not super smooth. But in the pre-reproducing, so 0 to 14, and then the reproducing sections, so 15 up to about 40-ish, we've got almost straight sides. And that, if we go back, is more in between a 3 and a 4. All right, it's closer almost to a 4 because 4 has almost a skyscraper shape, almost completely flat sides. And so this country is heading towards a 4. Now, what's going on over here? And I'm sorry, I don't know who it was that posted this country off the top of my head, but the person who posted this country explained why there is a difference. Because if you look, there are more males, every percentage until you get up into this higher range. There are more males than females. And the reason being is there is a strong preference in this country for male children. And it's starting to change. So you can see down here in the more recent years that has started to reverse, and we're getting closer to the half and half that we would expect. But there was a preference for male children. And so, and this isn't the only country we see that sort of preference in. Then you've got Kuwait. So the person who posted Kuwait probably looked at it and went, well, this is cool, but I'm not quite sure what's going on. So if you look here and kind of squint with ignoring this right here, this one is an odd pyramid to try and figure out what's going on. The bottom, the kids are a little bit bigger than the reproducing part. But this is probably between a 3 and a 4, right? Because you've got that slightly bigger part down here, but you've got a pinch in here, slightly bigger part up here. So this one's a little more difficult. I would not put something like this on the exam, just so you know. At least not one that looked like this with this weird curve in it. But what's going on over here? Kuwait is an oil producing country. And there are a couple of countries, if you look up Qatar, they also look like this, another oil producing country. And theirs is actually even worse, not worse, but odder, because this section is actually off the graph. They have more males in the country because they have immigration for the oil fields. And so that's why there's this imbalance of males and females. Because if you look at the age range, that's the age range for people who would be working in the well fields. All right, so Cuba. So the person who posted Cuba had this one correct as far as it is a current stage 4, heading towards late stage 4 or stage 5. So they are going to decrease. They're kind of steady now, and they're going to decrease in the future. You can see that because the base of the pyramid is that pinch in. So it's starting to pinch in, so there's fewer kids. The thing is with Cuba, and this wasn't in their post, the big reason why Cuba is decreasing, they did mention, I believe, the aging population. However, the other big reason is because there's a lot of emigration, people heading out of Cuba. And that has had a big impact on their population. And you can actually see there's a big section right here that's missing out of their population. And that is where they had a big migration out of the country. But it's continuing. They're still losing young people out of the country. And so that's going to continue to impact their population in the future. Bosnia Herzegovina, just threw this one in here because it's got a very nice shape as far as a stage 4. It doesn't have the perfect skyscraper, but the sides are fairly even. You've got an indication of a possible decrease because you've got that pinch in at the bottom with smaller percentages for the kids than the adults. Thailand. This one I pulled out because I just wanted to talk a little bit about what happened to this one, because I actually know what happened with Thailand and why their pyramid looks like this. So they are stage 4, possibly heading to a late stage 4, because they've got that little bit of a pinch. But why is it that they have this bulge right here and then it headed into this, headed into this smaller pyramid at the bottom? This is because Thailand decided in the 70s that they needed to get their growth under control. Their population growth was starting to become a concern, and so they actually initiated a bunch of education programs, especially centered around family planning and uses of condoms and birth control. They launched programs to get birth control out to all of the people in the country, so they had access to purchase it. When they started, it was just doctors that could prescribe it, but then they got the nurses on board, and then they actually got it so that you could pick up birth control pills at the corner store. And so you could get your birth control anywhere in the country. And that's what helped pull their population down over time. And their population is actually now headed towards a decrease because of that. Which could cause some problems, but it also kept their population from going out of control. There's the country of the Philippines that are nearby. At the same time, we're looking at doing something similar, and we're not able to, and are just now enacting similar programs to help try and pull their population down. And then Italy, I threw Italy in here because several of you did Japan, and Japan is the classic example of a late stage 4 or stage 5 country, but Italy is having the same problem. They are getting a aging population, so they're getting, most of their population now in that 45 to, 60-year-old. So they're a little behind Japan, so a good portion of their population still in the working ages. But it's going to start pushing forward, and you can see they're not going to have a lot of kids going forward. So unless they start having a higher birth rate or they start allowing more immigration, their birth rates are going to stay low. Their population is going to continue to decrease. All right. So that was just kind of my overview on the population pyramids and some of the stuff that was going on